Hello everybody, I'm Professor Margaret Ann Carter and I'm the MC for our webinar this afternoon. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which our teaching and learning institutions and communities are located and where we conduct our businesses. We pay deep respect to ancestors and elders, past, present and future. We are committed to honouring First Nation peoples' continuing connection to land, to water and to culture. On behalf of the Australasian Mental Health and Higher Education Organising Committee, I welcome you to our 2021-2022 webinar series, The Tapestry of Mental Health in Higher Education. We hope that our current webinar series will provide important opportunities to explore more of the rich and vibrant tapestry of issues and experiences that comprise mental health and wellbeing in higher education and the broader community. Each of our webinars focuses on different dimensions of the higher education experience: academics, students, professional and technical staff, and research. Today, we concentrate our attentions on the experience of academics. The Australasian Mental Health and Higher Education Organising Committee was established in 2017 as a community of interest in Townsville, Queensland, in response to the increasing need for action in the areas of mental health and wellness in higher education and the community. Successful conferences have been held at James Cook University in 2017 and 2018, and the Australasian Mental Health and Higher Education Committee, also referred to as AMHHEC, have forged a link with editors of the International Journal of Innovation, Creativity and Change for special editions in areas of mental health and wellness in higher education sector. The collaboration is ongoing and will continue to provide an important avenue for the dissemination of research of this group. In 2020, the AMHHEC group expanded its reach, forming a joint collaboration between James Cook University and the Australian College of Applied Psychology to host a successful webinar in the midst of the COVID pandemic. Today's webinar, we have three speakers: Vivienne Browne, Professor Stephen Naylor, and Professor Rachel Field. Our fourth speaker, Jeremy Orders, has fallen ill. Jeremy will present for us in a future webinar. Each speaker will hold the floor for approximately 15 minutes. At the conclusion of our speaker's presentation, Professor Taram Sengupa will facilitate our 15-minute to 20-minute question and answer conversation. Throughout the webinar, the chat icon is active. We invite commentary and questions through this function during the webinar. Our team members are monitoring the chat room and they will provide a synopsis of comments and questions for Taram. So let us begin. I welcome our first speaker, Vivienne Browne. Vivienne joins us as the Associate Director, Government Relations and Policy with Orygen. Vivienne's title for her webinar, Developing a University Mental Health Framework in Australia. Please join with me in welcoming Vivienne.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Margaret, and hello everybody. It's really fantastic to be here today and to deliver a presentation, as Margaret said, on the development of the Australian University Mental Health Framework. I'm meeting today in Parkville in Melbourne, which is on the lands of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I'm just going to share my screen, but I do have a presentation to go through, so I will start that from the beginning, and just hopefully if anyone on the rest of the panel can't see this or has any problems, please let me know, but otherwise I will kick off. So for those of you who don't know about Orygen, we're a youth mental health organisation. We deliver clinical youth mental health services to young people in the northwest region of Melbourne through 5 headspace centres and also a specialist state funded service as well. We're also a large youth mental health research centre, so with a focus on developing and testing new and innovative models of treatment and care for young people. But Orygen also has a designated role as a National Centre of Excellence in Youth Mental Health. So in that role, we are responsible for delivering training and workforce development across the youth mental health workforce. So that's both the clinical services and also non-clinical workforces as well. And we also provide policy and service improvement advice to governments, to service commissioners and planners and service providers. And so some of you may recall in 2017, one of those pieces of policy advice that Orygen developed and delivered was looking at the mental health of Australian university students. And that report was called Under the Radar. So following the release of that particular report, Orygen made several presentations to the Department of Health and the Department of Education in the Australian government and to the respective ministers of those portfolios, making submissions for the government to consider funding a project which would develop up guidance for universities across Australia on evidence-based practice in supporting mental health and wellbeing. So we identified that that sort of national guidance currently didn't exist in a comprehensive form anyway in Australia at that point. In September 2018, the Minister for Health, the Honourable Greg Hunt, announced funding to Orygen to develop up what would be the National University Mental Health Framework over 2 years. In announcing that funding, the Minister stated that the framework would aim to create or provide universities with guidance to create positive, healthy learning environments. And,
excuse me, Vivienne, may I just interrupt? We're not able to see the full screen of the PowerPoint.
Oh, no worries. I wonder what's
happening
there. I'll just have another crack at it. See what happens. Is that working?
Exceptional.
Oh, goodness.
Thank you very much, and thanks everybody for their patience.
Thank you. So sorry about that. Look, I'll just skip through just because I've wasted a bit of time there. Sorry about that. But basically, the stages of the framework development were across 4 different phases. One was around research to look at similar initiatives and evidence of what worked elsewhere. Second stage was extensive stakeholder consultation, so which I'll talk about mainly through this presentation as well. The third stage was around an iterative process of developing up the framework itself. And then finally, the framework was launched in December 2020. Now, in terms of the consultation, effective and extensive consultation engagement with students, with the university sector staff, with mental health organisations was going to be considered to be one of the most critical factors in achieving a final product that actually had acceptance and impact both across the university and the mental health sector. So to achieve that, we set up a number of key stakeholder mechanisms and engagement processes to achieve this and get direction and expert input and guidance. So these were an advisory group which consisted of senior executives and individual experts across both the mental health and the university sector. And it also included student representatives from university student organisations. That group met quarterly throughout the life of the project and provided guidance and advice, particularly in relation to the content of the framework. There were also 4 expert working groups that were set up across 4 different themes. So those themes were student mental health supports and services, a theme on mentally healthy universities, so looking at harm minimisation, mental health promotion and prevention activities. The third group that was set up looked at evidence-based responses of what was known and what wasn't known about what approaches, programs and interventions were effective for university student populations. And then the final group was looking at coordination and collaboration between universities and the mental health sector and between students and staff within university institutions. We then had a range of wider consultation opportunities that were provided throughout the project as well, both nationally, and we also took that to an international focus too. So the project team frequently attended conferences and forums and ran workshops where there was an opportunity for us to share progress as the project developed, build momentum and provide avenues for input and feedback. So there was over 400 stakeholders that engaged through those processes. And then there was also some focus groups specifically run with students to understand their needs and preferences for what the mental health framework should deliver. There were 93 students that participated in those focus groups across 5 states, and there were 8 focus groups that were conducted. So firstly, just to give you an overview of what we heard, and starting with what the students said that they needed and were looking for from the framework. They were looking for a whole of year approach, so particularly in regards to activities and mental health promotion, so embedded throughout the academic year, not just at particular points of transitional or academic stress like the start of the year or at assessment times. They wanted to be able to access services where and when they needed them, and some actually went further to describe what they thought would be an ideal service model for students, including an integrated triage system for mental health services within a service hub. They also wanted university environments to focus on their needs in a holistic way and ensure that they had inclusive and safe spaces within which to learn, which would support their wellbeing. And finally, they also were seeking increased levels of mental health literacy and opportunities to build mental health literacy both among students and also staff in institutions. Across all of the different stakeholders, we certainly got definitely a degree of consensus and agreement on a number of things that the stakeholders wanted the framework to do or be. So one of those was that they wanted to have the framework support a whole of university approach, and that this wasn't something that was to be siloed off to just a particular area of the university or the student services team. They wanted the framework to be pragmatic and realistic. They were seeking the framework to be student-centred, and by that, they were looking for the framework to be underpinned by having students involved in the design, the development, the delivery and evaluation of mental health and wellbeing responses in universities going forward. They wanted to see the framework identify that there was a shared responsibility for mental health and wellbeing, both within universities, from leadership through to staff and students, but also really importantly, they wanted the framework to clearly describe that there was a shared responsibility for this issue between both the university and the mental health sector as well. They wanted the framework to make sure it recognised that there was a lot of good practice and work already happening on this space, that we weren't starting from scratch, and that work needed to be promoted, highlighted and built on. They wanted the framework to build capacity or create opportunities for staff to build capacity in terms of access to resources, tools and information. And they also wanted the framework to clearly show and demonstrate that it recognised that universities were all very different. Their student populations varied, some were metro, some were regional, some are big, some are small, and so the framework needed to be able to be flexible and tailored to individual institutions. We also heard quite a lot of divergent views throughout the consultation process too, which I thought was good to highlight here, and some we were able to resolve within the framework development itself and some we weren't. So in terms of document format, structure and language, we had a difference of opinion. Some people wanted to have the final framework be a really detailed document with lots of evidence, examples and resources included. Others wanted a much shorter, simpler and more accessible document. There were people that had a preference for the framework to be quite directive and authoritative, to set expectations for the university and mental health sector that needed to be met. And then there were others that sought the framework to be much less directive and show respect, again, as I mentioned before, for the significant efforts, work and good practice that was already occurring. We also heard a difference of opinion around mental health service provision within universities. So again, we had some stakeholders who wanted the framework to not be prescriptive and allow individual institutions to decide on the services that they wanted to provide. Then there were others that wanted the framework to actually provide a clear articulation of what was the remit and duty of care of universities and what was the mental health sector's responsibility on these issues. And we also heard a difference of opinion too around accountability, and we weren't necessarily able to resolve this one in the framework itself, but some stakeholders were seeking the framework to describe that the accountability and reporting activities around student mental health and wellbeing needed to be determined by the individual institution. It was that institution's responsibility to decide about accountability mechanisms. Other people wanted the framework to actually describe accountability being delivered through a more publicly transparent line or a relationship back to a government agency or statutory body. So the final framework itself was launched in December 2020. It was launched by the then Minister for Education, the Honourable Dan Tehan. I'm not going to go into a great deal of detail here about what is in the frameworks. I've certainly got some links for you that you can go in and look at it for yourself. But at a high level, it provides guidance for mentally healthy university settings that support students to thrive educationally and personally. And then secondly, it provides guidance for the mental health sector to strengthen its engagement with universities to support student mental health and wellbeing. There are 6 principles that underline all of the activities and actions that are described in the framework itself. Again, I'm not going to necessarily read through all of these here, but just at a really high level, we are seeing the framework needed to be informed by student needs, that the whole of university responsibility to enhance student mental health and wellbeing was needed, and that mentally healthy communities which protect against mental illness or mental ill health are ones that were inclusive, promote connection and support achievement. Principle 4 was that the response to mental health and wellbeing is strengthened by collaboration and coordination. Students need to be able to access effective, timely services that meet their mental health needs, both on campus and off campus. And also that there is a need for continuous improvement and innovation. This isn't a set in time document that might necessarily will need to be revisited and revised and refined and improved over the years. We saw universities are obviously well positioned to take on this work through their research and translation agenda. And each of the principles in the framework is actually described in more detail through a series of actions and activities which would enact the principle in practice. And also to address this idea, so the framework itself is quite high level and is quite a short document, but to address some of those expectations by stakeholders that were expressed earlier on for a more detailed document, there is a really detailed report that provides further information on suggested practices and the evidence base informing the framework, and lots of great case studies to highlight the current good practice that's happening. So I've just got a link there, which if you go to that link, you'll be able to access all of the documents that are relevant to the framework. And I guess where to from here, I just wanted to sort of finish off by talking about, we've ended up with this document. It could be a document that could sit in the shelf, it could sit in the hard drive or online. But ideally, we want to have this document actually provide some utility to universities to continue to drive and deliver supports and services and programs for students to improve their mental health and wellbeing. So there's a few key drivers that we definitely identify will be critical to supporting the future take-up and implementation of the framework, and these might not necessarily sit within institutions themselves. So the policy drivers are really important. We've had 2 recent government reports that have recommended that universities and other higher education providers have an institution-wide strategy related to mental health. That's the Productivity Commission into Mental Health, and also the final report from the Higher Education Standards Panel a few years ago on improving retention, completion and success. So while these are important policy shifts, there still remains a need for mechanisms that require implementation, accountability and review. The lack of access to national data on the prevalence and experience of mental ill health among university students remains a big issue here and a big gap that has to be addressed. And also the Productivity Commission again identified that there was a need to improve the availability and dissemination of evidence around effective mental health interventions for these students. So increasing the collection and monitoring of data and evidence remains a priority. And one of the recommendations from the Under the Radar report that I still think has some currency is considering the opportunity to include some additional questions into the student experience survey regarding their experience of mental health and wellbeing. Adequate funding obviously remains a big issue, and stakeholders acknowledge that their current efforts were often hampered due to funding and resourcing limitations. So there's many support services within universities that still indicated that they're not resourced at levels that they can meet demand. And there's also a broader, very well documented gap in resourcing and funding for the mental health service sector, which has led to long waiting lists and the missing middle, which hampers efforts by university staff to actually get students into support and care that they need in the community. So it's a huge issue that must be still addressed for both sectors through policy levers in education and mental health, which will then drive greater government investment. And finally, there's workforce capacity that has to be considered. And so there's significant challenges still in recruiting and retaining a mental health clinical workforce, both within and outside universities. There's also challenges in building the mental health skills and knowledge with all staff and students, particularly when they're already experiencing time and resource pressures in terms of doing their current roles of their field of academic study. So implementation of the framework really needs to consider the incentives and address the barriers to building a workforce across the university and outside the university that can support the wellbeing, identify risk and respond to mental health issues in students when it occurs. So I think that that's probably all from me. I apologise again for the interruptions there while I tried to get my slideshow to work, but the link there is again for you to access. You can contact us and I'm happy to answer some questions later on.
Vivienne, thank you so much. You've brought it alive. I think, you know, many of us are familiar with the principles and perhaps the framework, but for you to take us through as you have, and particularly that honesty in terms of the diverse responses from the stakeholders, I think is very important. And as you've talked there too, those key drivers, I think that they're for us as an organising committee, the reality of how do we actually work with those for sustainability. So thank you very much, and I look forward to the question and answer session at the end to hear you respond to some more of the questions from the participants. It's now my great pleasure to introduce our second speaker, Professor Stephen Naylor. Stephen is the chair of the academic board with James Cook University. Stephen has a beautiful segue now into his webinar presentation. Stephen is going to present on mental health in higher education, the James Cook University response. What role should universities play? Please join with me in welcoming Stephen.
Okay now, Margaret?
All perfect, Stephen. Thank you.
Terrific, terrific. Well, look, I'm sorry for that. And just a welcome from the lands of the Woogaruga and the Bindal people. I'd like to say Watamoli, which is welcome from the lands here up in North Queensland. I'd like to thank Margaret and the team for inviting me to present at this, although I do feel sometimes hugely out of my depth in the fact that there's been so much wonderful work done on mental health within our institution, and I guess I'm probably more in a situation where I hear about it at various forums, but I guess on reflection I've also realised that there are a number of touch points where I can see the inputs that we have employed at James Cook University and the outputs and outcomes that are a result of some of those policies and various frameworks that are being used. I guess I have to start the whole conversation from the point that I'm an educator. That's what I was trained to do back in Melbourne back in the 1970s. And despite being chair of the academic board and having some roles on the executive, I really think that's about all that I can do. And I bring that skill set through 40 years of experience. And that skill set has really been grounded, I suppose, on being a country kid, first in family to go to university, a recipient, I suppose, of a change in policy from the Whitlam government, and having stuck with education in both the secondary school system, the TAFE system, and for the last 20, 25 years with the higher education system. And what I've, I suppose, prefaced this entire engagement with education is the fact that the student is centre to the whole experience. When we revamped our learning and teaching and assessment policy, we came up with a series of principles. And the first principle was that the student is at the centre of our university. And if we ever forget that, then I think we lose the plot in terms of higher education completely. The other thing to remember is that this has been a developing, I suppose, agenda. When I went to university, it was a pretty elite sort of area. It was a very small population of students who largely went from high school to university, very few mature age students. And back in the 70s, there weren't a lot of international students either. But those students were moving from a kind of a safe space where they'd developed capacities in higher education, in high school, and were then being transitioned to tertiary education. And I quickly discovered that tertiary education was all about destabilising that safe, assured platform that many young adolescents were going through. So in effect, the whole tertiary experience that we're working with is about opening the mind to new ways of seeing the world. It's about, I guess, creating an environment that controls the level of anxiety, of tension, of pressure, to allow a student to grow. It's like going to a gym. You can't build muscle capacity unless you stress those muscles, you put them under tension. And ultimately, the whole university experience seems to be a kind of a metaphor about jumping through hoops. And we jump through low, big hoops to start off with, and we gradually make our students jump through smaller and higher hoops as they move through their degrees towards graduation. This whole process is about opening up new ways of looking at the world, exposing you to new theories, about reshaping you in some way to prepare you for a professional career. And that has to be done under some pressure. Now, traditionally, when we used to start students off at university, we used to say, welcome to orientation, welcome to James Cook University, take a look to the left and take a look to the right, and only one of you will be there at the end of your graduation. Now, that was a kind of a wasteful approach that we had, that we weeded students out and cut a third off every year. Nowadays, it's about retention, and most universities are achieving above an 80% retention rate, which is very significant, but it's also important that we're not losing our students. And that really means that we need to develop a whole lot of skills for students. But because we're putting them under so much pressure, we must realise that this challenging episode in their life has to be supported. And we have to be able to allow students to navigate their way through these hoops. It is going to be about transformation. Those students will come out of the university experience as much more adaptable, problem-solving, research-based, data-driven individuals. And some of that also means building resilience. So that's where I start the whole journey. But I guess we also have to remember that that journey is going to need some support. So from an institutional perspective, we have developed a series of inputs. Those inputs take the form of policies and procedures that will help students, and I've just listed some of the URL links to those policies. They may work directly with how we deal with our teaching, learning and assessment. They may deal with issues that will confront students as they move away from home, and remembering that some of our students have come from long distances. They've come from interstate, they've come from out west to come to JCU. They may be in residences or in new, student houses and those sorts of things. So they may be facing a whole range of new challenges, sexual harassment and various misconducts appear. We also need to recognise that some students are going to be under pressure and not able to cope with some of the demands of those hoops that we put in front of them, and that we need to set up some safety nets. So we've developed policies around that area. We recognise that some students cannot progress at the same rate that the rest of the cohort will. So we need to have ways of managing and mediating some of the issues that may slow down progression. We also recognise that many students will be challenged by the confrontational nature of the learnings that they will need to take on in their first year. So there's a transition and first year experience policy that's built up. We also recognise that there is a diverse range of students who are going to be undertaking study at James Cook University or any university. And some of those students may carry various abilities, and some of them may be challenged. They may have mobility issues, a whole range of other issues. Some of them may be related to mental health, and we need to have systems in place to assist them with those areas. And we also recognise that students will have episodes where they will be challenged and special consideration will need to be given. So we have a full policy and procedure domain that's developed for these students to allow that to happen. Now, that's been around, you know, for as long as I've been at the university, you know, for nearly 16, 17 years. We also have other inputs such as support networks. Certainly during the COVID time, we were able to employ very quickly some of those systems to allow those students to deal with the pressures. And, you know, we modified the GPA system, and we brought in hybrid modes of student support because students couldn't get on campuses, and we provided food pantries and emergency support and a whole range of various bits and pieces. So, you know, we have policies, procedures, and we have kind of quick systems to deal with students who are, you know, challenged in many areas. And some of this may manifest itself in mental health issues. The other area that we have is a kind of a structured part of the university called the LTSE, the Learning, Teaching and Student Engagement area. And that also has within it a student equity and wellness unit. Now that's headed up by amazing professionals who do a job that is just unbelievable. They work directly with students and staff, building capacity, finding ways to kind of triage major issues and to build resilience and capacities through self-help and self-motivation. These begin, and I'm very proud to say JCU was one of the first universities, you know, more than 25 years ago to set up a mentoring program where more senior experienced students actually helped the fresh students coming into the university and gave them a kind of a hand up to pass it on. So that structure was very useful. We also have an accessibility unit which measures and monitors various students with disabilities or learning challenges. We have counselling, which is in various layers, you know, from sort of initial consultation to serious management of mental issues that are needing to be, I guess, addressed over a period of time. We also have a very holistic model and realise that wellness is also about feeling comfortable within the organisation and with a community of other scholars. And the Respect Now Always process, we had Elizabeth Broderick come through to the university assisting us a couple of years ago to establish a report and address a series of policy matters that could strengthen our sexual harassment and sexual assault and many of those areas, so that we have a strong structure to drive an understanding within the organisation. Chaplaincy is a strong area of JCU too, and is led by a wonderful individual who seems to be able to engage many of the student cohort. We also have virtually automated systems like the desk, which allows students to connect to external agencies like Beyond Blue, and info sheets, which are kind of like self-help guides, I suppose, that students can actually tap into when various issues that we know will be confronting a student from perhaps another state or has, you know, relocated into Townsville, or international students, you know, of which we have many on campus pre-COVID. There's only a few of them around at the moment. So, you know, things like homesickness and loneliness and meeting up and understanding about accommodation possibilities. So this is a very holistic model that we work through. Now, with all of those inputs in place, the Commonwealth Government has kind of prompted us to try and get a kind of more systematic approach, and certainly the framework that that Vivienne has spoken about has given us a series of prompts, I guess, to reorganise many of these structures and try and fit them in a logical fashion to build capacity by integrating the many services that we have. We were, I guess, guided by the Vice-Chancellor who established a steering committee where we took on board Orygen's mental health framework. We looked at the outcomes from the Productivity Commission into mental health, and we looked at the various other research data, sector analysis and those types of things to try and give us some guidance on how we would develop our own strategy in this particular space. And I believe Vanessa Cannon, the Chief of Staff who heads up that strategy units on the attendee list. So I hope I'm telling you the correct story here. But we have the parameters clearly outlined, sort of like in terms of reference. This has to be something that is both bottom up and top down. It's got to be co-developed. It has to recognise the various principles that we have in our learning and teaching policy, which says diversity is one of the strengths of our organisation. It integrates both the learning and the curriculum area. And it's also developed over a stepped approach so that we don't want to create the world in one day. We're at least going to do it over a week. So that's important. And that last little caveat is be realistic and try and make something that's achievable, and that'll make it a more long-lasting exercise. So the structure is developed around this little model of promote, respond, and protect. And at the base, at the focus of the kind of model is this sense of improving an understanding of mental health and wellbeing for the student cohort. The context is clearly outlined there, and this really responds to the makeup of our student cohort, so that we've got a very strong Indigenous presence up here in North Queensland. International students are crucial as well, but we also have a strong need to create a sustainable future for higher education and for those students who graduate. And we've looked at the number of enablement systems, such as the leadership, the use of students to drive much of this exercise, so that we sort of get from the horse's mouth perspective. Community engagement's important too, because, yes, we are a university and we're kind of an enshrined learning academy, but we sit within a context of a community, and we work very closely where practical with various agencies. As in Townsville in particular, the Townsville Hospital is on the edge of the campus. So it's a kind of an integrated health and education setting. And of course, what we need to do is we need to try to develop agency. It's not about always providing assistance, but actually creating agency for both staff and students to manage their own mental health and to develop that resilience as they move through the various parts of the organisation. The action plan's built around 4 domains, about learning, about working in terms of recognising the workplace as a special place, and it needs to always go back to promoting wellness. It's about a live exercise that recognises the fact that early intervention and, are you okay kind of sense, looking for signs, picking up cues, providing information, and trying to build a very positive environment about the fact that we are all going to be challenged at various times in terms of mental health, and that, the goal is wellness. So, we need to recognise that there will be ebbs and flows, and we need to have that capacity to work our way through it. The other thing is to remember that we're not all hermits on this planet. We're certainly not hermits at the university. We work better in groups where we share our problems. It's an easier way of solving things because we draw on the expertise of the many. So collaboration, partnerships and community engagements are crucial. So that's our strategy. But there's a couple of other things that so virtually we've got our inputs, we've got our strategy, and some of the outputs and outcomes we get. So Chair of Academic Board, I'm really keen to get reports from various parts of the organisation. And Larissa, our Head of Student Equity and Wellbeing, provides us with updates at Academic Board. In the last Academic Board, she provided the hot topic, which gave us an update on the 2020 year with a report of the engagement with the student cohort, some of the challenges during COVID, some of the strategies that they use, such as kind of a telehealth model. And we get some sense of what's going on in terms of the student community. These are also managed through our Education Committee, which is a subcommittee of Academic Board. And we get a lot more dashboards and a lot more detail in those committees. And these reports will also be presented at Council on various occasions. And there have been some large, nearly hour-long presentations at our University Council on issues of mental health. So we're very well serviced by the various groups. The other way of monitoring student wellness in the organisation are a kind of, a sort of an oblique measure. Student feedback comes through our boards of studies, and the two divisions have huge amounts of information that they provide from the various cohorts of students, and we understand where those challenges are. As somebody who sits on many academic appeals and misconducts, I'm made painfully aware that many of the issues that are confronting our students are driven back to mental ill health. And these things are often very strong mediation points that we need to take on board when we're coming up with decisions of how we manage misconducts, progression issues and those types of things. And I must admit, my colleagues who often sit on those panels carry great empathy and great ability to understand how that student cohort works as they work directly with them. We also have very strong student forums in the DVC. Professor Marie Diamond-Thompson runs student forums twice a year, where the students are given that opportunity to have a platform and voice, not just things about mental health, but about a range of areas that contribute to that journey that students are going through in their student experience. Clearly, students sit on management and governance committees, so we get their voice that way. But I guess where I'm coming from, and as I said, I'm not directly dealing with that many students, in an executive position, but I do think we need to provide opportunities where we can listen to the many voices, the students who are potentially coming to our organisation, our international students, our Indigenous students, students who have graduated, staff, various professional and technical staff who are dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis. And we as management and executive need to presuppose that we understand what the issue is and actually listen more to understand how other people are experiencing those concerns. So that's probably the way JCU is managing those areas. And I guess you should have picked up some of the areas that I think are important in terms of the way a university should play a role in mental health. So thank you, and I'm happy to answer any questions later on.
Thank you, Stephen, for this incredibly insightful journey in terms of looking at the institutional response, but keeping the heart in there in terms of students first, students matter, and just all of the different dimensions of how to work with and support students, and which means working with and supporting our academics in that landscape as well. So it's been a really thorough presentation, and I look forward to further conversation at the end of all of the speakers. So thank you very much. It's now my pleasure to introduce our final speaker for today, Professor Rachel Field. Rachel comes to us from the Centre for Professional Legal Studies at Bond University, and Rachel's going to take us on a journey, and the title of her webinar presentation is Examining a Day in the Life of an Australian Academic, 2021. Please join with me welcoming Rachel.
Thank you so much, Margaret. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm joining you from Brisbane, and I pay my respects to the original custodians of the lands here, the Yugara, the Yagara and the Turrbal people, and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and just acknowledge the First Nations people of the lands from which we are all joining this webinar today. Noting as well that it's NAIDOC week, so a special week for us to remember the culture and achievements of our Indigenous peoples, and also to note that coming from the law side of things, that sovereignty was never ceded and that Australia was, is and always will be Aboriginal land. So I'd also like to thank the committee for giving me this opportunity to be here today. AMHHEC has been a leader in the area of mental health in higher education in the Australasian area for many years now. And I want to thank the committee for the leadership role that you take in terms of bringing people together, running the conference, running the webinars, and also ensuring that the ideas that get discussed when we're all together are then translated into the literature and into scholarship, which is then able to be disseminated. And thank you, Vivienne and Stephen, for your contributions today and for really sort of honing our attention to the purpose of universities, which is the student. I'm coming to you just after having left the third day of the STARS conference, which is one that I co-chair. And we've had some really amazing keynote speakers there that have really emphasised for us this week the public good of the university, the purpose of academic life, and how the student is just very much at the centre of that. And of course, for STARS, the student is everything. It's the conference is all about talking about the student experience and how we can support student learning and student success. So I'm very much on board with Vivienne's high order policy level approach to centering the student and attending to the student's wellbeing. I'm very impressed with the approach that JCU is adopting, and just that at that high level of management, the recognition of the importance of student wellbeing to their learning and to the structure of the university is so critical. And I'm going to turn now the attention of the group to thinking about academics and their place in all of this. So I'm actually just winging it a bit. I don't have slides, and so this is a bit strange for me. I'm just going from notes. So I thought I'd try something different for today for my wellbeing, having come from a conference where there's lots and lots of slides. So what I'm going to do then is talk about the academic, and I can do that because I am one. That's my lived experience, and I am in the corridors, I'm in the classroom at Bond University. I teach the first semester transition subjects, the foundational law subjects of foundational concepts, and I also teach dispute resolution. So I'm co-director of the Dispute Resolution Centre at Bond as well. So I wanted then to get us thinking about, if the student is at the centre of everything that we're doing in the university and of the professional purpose that we have, then how do we as academics, and Stephen pointed to this earlier in one of his slides, how do we have the capacity to support student wellbeing in order to support student success? And I think what I have to note right at the start is that we can't just be relying on academics to be resilient or to build their own resilience, or we can't rely on the yoga classes that are put on for academics. Even though, you know, from HR perspectives, those things are positive and good, we have to look at the structural issues within universities and look at the impacts of those structural issues, which also come more broadly from other societal and cultural and economic issues. The reality of the neoliberal university is something that we can't ignore. So I want to talk about a day in the life of an academic in terms of the elements of our work. And then I'd like to share with you some research that sits within the broader range of academic work around the well-being of academics. And Margaret has some beautiful work published in that area as well, which I'd like to acknowledge. The work that I've been doing is with colleagues Colin James at the Australian National University and also Caroline Strevens, who's at the Portsmouth Law School. And we've done some survey work with law teachers. So I can share that, and it does the work that we've done, because we're in law faculties, we've been concerned about law teachers, but the results of our work, I think, does point to some the broader issues, and it does sit really neatly within that range of other academic work that is about the academy more broadly. So if I just turn to what we do then as academics, and for me in my 25 years, it's been an absolute joy to be an academic because of the range of things that I get to do. So I'm a typical 40-40-20 academic, where I have 40% of my work is dedicated to teaching, 40% to research, and then 20% service and engagement. And I'd like to point to how things have changed a little bit for us as academics on the ground since the COVID pandemic really hit. So things are very different now for our teaching, aren't they? We had to very quickly adapt to and shift very quickly our teaching practices away from face-to-face to online environments. Some universities were better set up than others to have that happen. My own institution, Bond University, is very much about the face-to-face engagement aspect, and so it was a real challenge for all of my colleagues. I came from QUT though, which was a very well set up for online learning. So I felt I had a bit of an advantage when that shock sort of hit, compared to some of my colleagues who'd been at Bond for many years. So our teaching had to change to online. We changed our delivery methods. That also meant that we had to relook at our assessment methods. Online exams have been challenging for us and have raised all these extra issues around academic integrity. And I think in talking to my colleagues, I've just noticed that there is a sense of being overwhelmed with additional workload, with additional tasks, with being taken out of their comfort zone in terms of what they were used to doing, and just having a whole lot of additional pressures. In some institutions, management was trying to avoid redundancies of the full-time staff, and so the casualties were really the sessional staff, the casual staff members. But what that meant then was that the full-time staff had their workloads incredibly increased. Another stress that we've been experiencing as academics in relation to our teaching concerns the students themselves. So in talking with colleagues, they've relayed that they're just getting a lot more requests from students for assistance. The students are distressed. They are not managing with assessment. They're ending up in their offices or talking to them online, often in tears. And I'm on the disciplinary committee for the faculty, and we've noticed on that committee that there have been an increase in the academic integrity matters that come to us. And when we see these matters, we're noticing that it's students having additional pressures cast on them as a result of the COVID situation, and ending up making some very bad decisions around academic integrity simply because they are at their wits' end and don't know how to cope and don't know of other ways of doing it. So I've seen some of my own students come through that committee now, people who I would never, ever have expected to make those sorts of decisions and to be dishonest in their academic work. But really they felt that they had no other options. So teaching has really changed, and there's a lot of stressors for academics around our teaching. And I guess I should say here as well, my lens is the academic, but I also think that we need to think very carefully about the stressors and pressures that our professional staff are facing as well in this new world. Some of those things will be similar to the stresses that academics are experiencing, but some are also very distinct to the aspect of professional staff work. To turn then quickly to research, so I think the biggest impact that I've seen in terms of myself and my colleagues is our capacity to research and write when we have to do so much more in relation to our teaching, and it's taking so much more of our energy. So, you know, recently, the Centre for Professional Legal Education did a sit down with all the staff who are researchers in the faculty to say, well, what are the barriers to your researching, and how can we help address those? And, you know, to a person, everyone just said, I don't have the capacity, either the time or the mental capacity or energy to be able to do the sort of work that's necessary to produce quality scholarship. So that, I think, is a problem. Also, we're finding that with the travel restrictions, although we're getting much better, and this is a lovely webinar online that we've got here, the STARS conference is entirely online, that I think, though, is impacting, it's taking some of the fun out of the research component of our academic work, because connecting with colleagues at conferences, travelling, visiting, opportunities and that sort of thing internationally, they just aren't there. So that is that's impacting too. And then I think in terms of service, again, we sort of see increased demands. If you've got external service obligations, then those organisations, for example, Women's Legal Service is one that I have as an external service thing that I do. Those organisations are facing their own challenges as a result of COVID. And so that can create stressors too. And there's also an increase, and Stephen, you might talk to this as well, about asking more of academics in terms of committees, in terms of policy development, in terms of how universities are in fact coping with what the world now looks like, which is the new normal. So if we just look at that as a snapshot in a day in the life of an academic, and if I can then connect that to the research that I've done that sits within that broader work. So two writers that are really important, which I'll refer you to, are Ray and Kinman. They've done a lot of work in the United Kingdom about the wellbeing of the academy, and they have an article from 2020, which I'd be really happy to share the citation for, which brings together a whole lot of relevant literature across a range of university studies that looks into academic wellbeing. So that would be like a snapshot for you if you wanted to sort of get across that literature quickly. But the point is, as academics, we have to attend to student wellbeing to ensure their learning and their success. So how is our wellbeing? How are we travelling? And we can see from a day in the life of the academic that there are many stressors and increased stresses as a result of the COVID situation. And the research that I've been doing with Colin and Caroline affirms this. So we did a study in 2017 in both the UK and Australia, and then we did a study in 2020 after COVID had been around for a number of months. And what we noticed was, although the issues were very similar across those two studies in relation to difficulties that academics faced and things that they wanted to see be different to enable a better working life. So the themes were a little bit similar, and I'll talk through what some of those themes are in just one sec. But in the 2017 study, there was a very strong sense of anger amongst the law teachers that responded to the survey. So we had 132 people in the UK and 160 Australian law teachers respond to that 2017 survey. There was a lot of anger. There was a lot of pushback against the neoliberal university, about the commodification of higher education, about treating students as consumers and clients, and about the impact that had on academics. There was a sense of frustration, a sense of disappointment in university management that was coming through, and a sense of disconnect with the values of in the institution where these academics found themselves, which were all across the UK and all across Australia. So that was the 2017 study. And then in 2020, the numbers are a bit different there. We had in the UK 117 academics in the UK and 43 in Australia. So not as much of a take-up rate in Australia, but still a solid number in terms of reaching a point of saturation with the qualitative data. And the sense in 2020, even though the themes remained fairly similar, was one of overwhelm. So people feeling, academics feeling simply overwhelmed with the demands that were being made on them, and the workload impacts of what had happened with COVID, and a sense that did not come through in the 2017 survey of actually understanding the difficult situation that university management was in. So the anger had shifted a little bit. It didn't shift in the UK as much as it did in Australia. We had a lot more people responding. I don't think that there's anything that my university could do differently at the moment. They're doing their very best. We can, you know, we're all in this together kind of idea. But as I said, the themes were fairly similar. So the themes that came back, and we were asking them the question, what could your university do to improve the quality of your working life? So the answers that came back were, we need the university to look at how we can manage the administrative burden. So academics finding that the administrative burden, emails, all of the things associated with the administration of teaching and service, that needed to be, particularly teaching though, that needed to be somehow reduced, or we needed to work together to work out ways of doing that. And the loss of a lot of sessional staff and also some professional staff that might help us do that was an issue. Academics also spoke about feeling like there was a lack of support. I know universities do, have, learning and teaching units and these sorts of things, but a lot of the people that were talking to us were saying that they felt that there wasn't sufficient support to help them do their job well and to give them the capacity. So all of these things really culminating in a sense of workloads not being manageable, people telling us that it wasn't sustainable for them to continue to work the number of hours that they did, and that their love of their job was being diminished because of these workloads. Another theme was talking about management styles. And so there were comments about how staff were losing autonomy. There was a lack of transparency from management, and there were problems with communication and respect. And so I think what we can do is take these themes, and they can actually be a little bit of a list that we can give to our managers in our faculties to say, if you want to improve the quality of the working life of our academics, and hence give them more capacity to support the well-being of students and hence support student learning, then these are some things that need to be attended to. So we need to ensure that we work together to reduce the administrative burden. We need to ensure that people have the support that they need. Workloads, perhaps we can start to think differently about what we do with workloads. I don't know, I'm not a manager, but I'm sure that there's something that we can do there. Management styles need to be addressed. Do managers need sometimes to go and take some training about communication styles, about how to increase transparency in their faculty, and how to increase autonomy? If we look to positive psychology, then we can see that the self-determination theory also gives us some good ideas in terms of autonomy support, competence support, and relatedness. So there's a whole lot of things that we could do structurally in terms of offering better support to academics, which will then result in our being able to better support the student. And I think another thing which comes back, ties the loop with what we were saying about a day in the life of the academic, is that our data revealed that there is a lot of confusion about strategic priorities. And this is something that a university can make clearer. Vice-chancellors can have clear visions of what they want the university to look like. And that can be communicated more clearly to academics. So the confusion that was relayed to us was around, am I supposed to be a fantastic teacher, or am I supposed to be a world-class researcher? Or am I supposed to be out there in the community, making my institution look good, I suppose. So that strategic priority disconnect, and it actually goes to, I think, the sense of professional identity. And I think we can bring a lot of this back to the sense of professional identity that academics have. It needs to be realigned to the student. It needs to be clearer for academics, the really good job that they're doing, the place of the university in Australian society. And there's a lot that structurally can be done. Of course, it's our duty to ourselves and to our students that we look after our wellbeing as well. So attending to that in the ways that, we teach our students to look after their wellbeing. Often we're not doing that for ourselves. But we can't stop at the individual or expect individual academics to be the answer. The answer has to come from structural reform within universities. So that's what I'd like to say for today. Thank you for the opportunity to share that work with you. And I'm looking forward to the discussions that ensue.
Rachel, thank you so much for a really honest, thought-provoking, empowering presentation. And I think as you were talking, there's a number of things that you would have said that could translate very much to other higher education institutions and the lived experience of a number of the colleagues that are here on the platform today. So thank you very much. And I do look forward to the continuing conversation that we're about to transfer into. So thank you. It's now my pleasure. I hand over to Professor Taran Sengupta, and Taran is going to take the lead for the remainder of our session in terms of facilitating our conversation.
Thank you very much. Thanks for the chat, and thanks to people who are saying g'day in the chat. Wonderful perspective from the institutional perspective, the policy perspective, the governance perspective, the academic perspective, and the student perspective. And please keep the comments coming in. We're collating them. Vivienne, there was a lovely comment, you may not have seen it, but about the phrase you used, a mentally healthy university setting. What does that mean? What does that look like? How would I know if I was in one of those settings or if I wasn't?
That's a very good question. I mean, I think the idea there was often in mental health, we sort of look at, interventions and services and supports that go across this spectrum of kind of mental illness to mental health. And it sort of doesn't necessarily recognise that there's, good wellbeing and poor wellbeing. You can be, having poor wellbeing, but okay mental health. So it's sort of about taking a much more holistic approach as well. And I think the idea there as well is sort of embedding that whole of university approach too, that this isn't necessarily a service response. This is about creating and designing curriculums in such a way that support people to be able to engage in the academic experience in a way that doesn't necessarily compromise their wellbeing if it can be mitigated against or help. So it's about looking at exam timetabling and assessment timetabling across a course and making sure that there's not a congregation of assessments all due at one time that might put students at greater risk. It's about building communities that encourage that kind of connection with other students and with staff as well. So I think the idea of sort of mentally healthy communities and university communities is sort of trying to, I guess, take it beyond a kind of mental health, mental illness paradigm and just look at it in a holistic way.
I like the notion if you're the boss and your staff come to work whistling, you've done a good job.
Yeah.
Is that the sort of thing that you would imagine? Could you tell from being on a campus or in a chat room or something that, it is mentally healthy?
Yeah, well, it's a good question too, but I think, yeah, students or staff would be able to, yeah, absolutely let you know if they feel like it's a place where they're supported, it's inclusive of, you know, their particular identities and their needs. And, yeah, that it's a place that they want to go to, and they're enjoying their engagement with the university.
And I'll certainly invite Stephen and Rachel to jump in as we go through the discussion, because I had a couple of points that have come up in the chat and out of each of your presentations. Stephen, you talked about helping students navigate the system and the obstacles and the hoops we almost deliberately put in front of them. And that came up in Rachel's talk as well in terms of the academic staff. To what degree do we create the problem? You know, are we as academics or an institution creating problems or artificial problems for students when the whole thing is tough enough anyway?
Yeah, look, I totally agree. And I think that's the point that I was trying to make, Taryn, that we are putting pressure on the students. What we need to do is we need to be able to have enough empathy and understanding that not all students are as well geared up to deal with some of these tensions that we deliberately place in front of them, because what we are trying to do is to grow their capacity to deal with the myriad of issues that are going to face them in their professional careers. What we want is to develop resilience, not hardened folk that are sort of ossified to the point where they're, you know, not receptive to stress and those sorts of things, because it's a natural process that we go through. And I think, you know, your point about coming to work whistling, well, you know, if you find me whistling every day, then I think, Stephen, you've got to say, what's wrong with you? You know, are you not facing up to some of the realities that are dealing with? You know, the fact that we do have ebbs and flows are really crucial. And look, I remember when I was, you know, lecturing and you know, there were times that you just look forward to that first week of classes where you've got these bright-eyed students who are fresh and dying to learn, and you can work with them. Now, you know, that's a kind of fantastic thing. But I used to hate, you know, like week 8 or something where I'd have 200 essays that I had to mark, and I'd go home and deal with those. So, you know, I wasn't whistling on those days. But what we were taught, and this is sort of my teacher education many years ago, is that for the students and for your staff, you need to be able to keep up a consistent face and not be too up and down to kind of be useful for them. They kind of want somebody who's able to manage those issues. And if you are having a bad time, the best thing to do is to come in and say to your students, oh, my dog died today and I'm really sad about a whole range of things. And you know, look, I'm not going to be my buoyant self today, but you know, these things happen and that dog had a good life. I mean, whatever it is. But I do think that we need to be incredibly mindful that these issues do matter. And they do matter in a big way to some people who are in a particular point of their, you know, their management of that transition to get through all of those hoops. So, you know, I guess they're the sorts of issues that I'm really mindful that we need to be receptive to these issues, that we do it intentionally, but we need to do it in a caring manner. The pressure, you know, it's the gym instructor who's putting you under enormous stress, but it's not going to break you.
Rachel, do academics, in your experience, look forward to week 1? You know, do they have that enthusiasm Stephen described, or is it just another set of compliance and forms to fill in? Look,
at the moment, I'm not getting the sense that they're looking forward. They're not whistling. I mean, I think academics are in a very privileged position. So if I was talking to my dean, he would say, you know, compared to other professions, you know, academics are actually in a very good position. We just need to wake up and see, you know, how good the situation is compared to other environments, and we need to be grateful for that. But I don't know, if, you know, when it's your lived experience that things were even better than they are, you know, today, it's hard to accept that a decline, I guess, in your working conditions, which is how people express that to us. They were expressing their view that the quality of their working life had deteriorated And that was in 2017, it was as a result of the neoliberal university. In 2020, it was the neoliberal university in the context of COVID.
So, I mean, nostalgia is the best source, so things are always better. And, you know, we talk about the good old days. There were a number of comments there, and I'll throw this open to the whole panel. How do we measure what we're doing? How do we measure the impact of policies or activities? I'll throw that open to anyone.
Stephen, I think that's you, yeah.
Yeah, look, I must admit, I do a dozen graduations every year, and I watch students walk across that stage with a gleam in their eyes as they prepare to go out and work in a professional world. So I measured that, but I also now measure the attrition rates and those students who have not been able to jump through, whether it's the first hoop or the last hoop. And I see that's a failing in the organisation. 30 years ago, we were made to use a bell curve to trim off a third of every cohort as you went through the system. Now I see it's a loss of potential. We need to tailor our learning for success, because you can develop incredible resilience at a level AQF 5 or 6. You don't have to be getting an AQF 7 your first time around, or an AQF 9. I think these are some of the levers that we need to be incredibly mindful of. But I guess the other measure that we have is those staff. I also chair most of the promotions panels, and I see those staff who are able to show an innovative approach to manage that incredible workload that Rachel's talking about. I mean, I am absolutely mind-struck by the amount of work that some of these people do and continue to do it, and front up for promotion, you know, in a 3-year cycle or something like that. So they're the ones that I measure in terms of success. But then I walk around the campus and see staff who I've known for 10, 15 years who've never gone for promotion. And I kind of want to, you know, say, look, you've got something to share here. What is it that's holding you back? Because I think, you know, we have a couple of measures that we can use for people who are managing, you know, their well-being within the organisation as well. So, you know, I guess we've got to look for signs slightly outside of, you know, a queue in front of the counsellor's area, or people putting their hand up for pressure. We've actually got to look at a whole range of these things to understand how our workforce is really operating.
If you add to that, because you talked about co-design, and it's a wonderful, wonderful thing we should be doing. But is there a risk that the students ask for more and we give more as academics at the expense of ourselves?
Yeah, look, I think that's entirely true. And I think that's where you can actually turn a conversation around. I noticed somebody talked about how great it is when you talk with a mature voice to a group of students. You know, students have incredible capacity. I mean, many of them are juggling work and many other things as well as their studies. I guess many of them are also under that pressure, so that if an academic is to consult and go through various forums or seek feedback and say, well, picture my life and how I've just had to pivot and put all of my lectures online, and I loved lecturing to you face to face, and you know, I was able to draw on you know, the kind of performance qualities of seeing when students' eyes are glazing over, and I can kind of target a question to activate that part of the lecture theatre. I can't do that anymore. You know, there's all of those types of things. I think students are quite happy to understand what your lot's like. The issue is finding the time and the place that's most appropriate to share those kind of experiences, because we are all in this together. You know, the journey is about students, it's about staff, it's about administrators. I mean, some of us are struggling too.
So,
you know,
I think that's true. I'll go to Vivienne now and see if you want to add to that, Vivienne.
Well, I was actually also thinking, as Stephen was talking to before, about looking at measuring impact and success, and looking at attrition, and looking at, you know, those students that are getting up on the stage and, you know, getting accreditation and walking out to lead productive lives. And there was an interesting comment in the chat too around, you know, the need for increased funding, but it's so hard to get such a competitive space. So thank Maxine for her comment. And how do we go about that? And that's actually probably one of the best levers that we have to get more investment into supporting wellbeing staff and students, absolutely recognising that a mentally healthy university community is one that the staff is also experiencing good mental health. But that is in terms of making the cost benefit argument, I suppose, to sort of say if we don't actually invest in early intervention and supports and services that promote good wellbeing and address mental health issues when they do emerge amongst students, that they will potentially leave their course early. If we do intervene early, then we could potentially avert that and have them continue on with their educational engagement and go on to lead you know, productive and healthy lives as well. And so there's actually a cost benefit argument to be made there as well to help drive investment both within the institution but also from government too.
So Rachel, we've only got a minute or two, but does that cost effectiveness argument apply to staff as well? Can we persuade universities to invest more in staff for better outcomes for all?
I think it really should. I mean, I think it just makes sense, doesn't it, to invest in structures and approaches and just put the energy into ensuring that we create workplaces that are healthy. You know, at the moment, it is questionable. There is a lot of burnout, as has been noted in some of the comments in the chat, and we need to turn that around. And of course, we're all in it together, as you say, Stephen. The academics have to come to the middle, so to speak, as well. But I think you know, the concern in the wellbeing literature is that it's too easy to say that it's the individual's job to attend to their wellbeing and to sort that out, and it's too easy to not look at what structural and cultural and other issues need to be addressed, because they're hard. They're big picture things that are hard and probably long term in terms of getting on top of. But both things need to happen. Individual work needs to be done as well as structural if we're going to really get proper change. And as somebody noted in the chat as well, you know, this new way of being is not going to go away. So it is requiring us to really adapt for the future and to be sustainable in our workplaces.
We are really at the limit of time, but there were questions in the chat. Please keep them coming in about who has mental health nurses. So pop those in the chat, everyone can see that. Also the reference that you mentioned, Rachel. So I'm going to hand back to Margaret now just to wind this very interesting seminar up. Thank you, Margaret.
Thanks, Taram and Rachel and Stephen and Vivienne. As I was sitting there listening to the last part of our session, I was thinking, you know, that the challenge for us is the learnings that we take, what resonates with us, and where do we go to next? What's our next move in terms of us taking courage and having agency in terms of how do we advocate within the landscape that is our lived experience. So that invitation is to all participants. And I think for us as an AMHHEC organising committee, that's the mantle and the flame that keeps us alive. So I thank all participants who have joined us live today and those participants that will be listening to our recording. My appreciation also to the AMHHEC organising committee, who've worked for several years to ensure that mental health and higher education within the community remains on our radar. And it remains on our radar so that we are moving in the right direction. Participants, you will receive an email within the next few days with the link to this recording. And also, as all good webinars have, you will receive a short survey. So the survey really has a couple of questions and it helps us to ensure that the focus and content of our subsequent webinars resonates with what you need and what is relevant to you. Our next webinar is scheduled for the 8th of September. And for those of you who've signed up for the webinar, I thank you graciously on behalf of the organising committee. And those of you who are about to sign up, I thank you as well. So on behalf of the AMHHEC Organising Committee, once again, I would very much like to thank our presenters, Rachel Field, Vivienne Browne and Stephen Naylor, and Taram for leading our conversation there at the end, and for the presenters who have engaged so graciously in terms of the rich conversation. Thank you very much. Stay safe and do prioritise your own mental wellbeing. Thank you.